Mr. Speaker, I've always been interested in origins. Even though my training is in the law and in history, it has ever been an avocation of mine to contemplate and to study the origins of man and of life here on earth.
Then why haven't you ever done that?
If we're keeping score here, that's Aaron 1, Pence 0.
And many theories of origins have been propounded throughout our nation's history.
No, Mr. Pence. In the entirety of our nation's history, only one theory has ever been propounded regarding the origin of man. Regarding the origin of life, there is as yet no theory. Instead, what we have is a collection of connected hypotheses of endosymbiosis and abiogenesis, and almost all of these hypotheses could be true at the same time and could all be contributors to the multiple methods by which life evidently arose. But thus far, none of them meet the minimum criteria required to qualify as a scientific theory.
Okay, so now it's Aaron 2, Pence 0. But just think about this rather than me just keeping score. Which one of these two people do you think should actually be in charge of, well, anything at all?
1859, a sincere biologist returned from the Galapagos Islands and wrote a book entitled The Origins of Species, in which Charles Darwin offered a theory of the origin of species, which we've come to know as evolution. Charles Darwin never thought of evolution as anything other than a theory. He hoped that someday it would be proven by the fossil record, but did not live to see that, nor have we.
So, we're just, a minute or so into this video. And what have we established? We've established that Pence actually doesn't know what a scientific theory is. We've also established that he must have been living under a rock for his entire life, because evolution has been attested to by multiple lines of inquiry, not just the fossil record, and especially since we've been able to map the genome. Well, if you watch the rest of this video, which Aaron put out a few years ago, I think it was a 2016 video, Aaron does such a great job of eviscerating Pence that I can't even come close to doing that. But I have another point for putting Pence in this video.
Evolution not taught as a sincere theory of biologists, but rather, Mr. Speaker, taught as fact.
A fact is a point of data that is either not a dispute or is indisputable in that it is objectively verifiable, and that certainly applies to evolution. There are many facts we can teach about evolution, things we can prove to be true of evolution, but there is not one fact anyone can honestly claim in favor of creationism. There is no truth you could show for any religious belief.
Not that lots of people haven't tried. I mean, look at the trees! Okay, so what Pence is now going to refer to is a new discovery made by paleontologists. Bear in mind that Pence was making his speech back in 2002.
Paleontologists are excited about this, Mr. Speaker, but no one's pointing out that the textbooks, I guess, will need to be changed, because the old theory of evolution, taught for 77 years in the classrooms of America as fact, is suddenly replaced by a new theory, or I hasten to add, I'm sure we'll be told, a new fact.
The textbooks will not have to be changed, although they should be updated to include these newly discovered facts. The facts that are already in the textbooks are still facts, and it is still the same theory, except that now it is even stronger than it was back when you refused to learn it.
Okay, I'm definitely not keeping score after that one, because that was a knockout.
Well, the truth is, it always was a theory, Mr. Speaker. And now that we've recognized evolution as a theory, I would simply and humbly ask, can we teach it as such?
Okay, but the first lesson should be what a theory is. If you could prove a theory, it would not become a law. Theories are more than mere laws. Natural laws are just observations phrased either as mathematical equations or as short statements that are consistently true under specific circumstances. Theories account for or explain natural laws. So the various laws of gravity, of which there are a few, are contained within the overarching theory of gravity. Get it? And likewise, proving a theory wouldn't make it a fact either, although hypotheses do have to be considered factual in order to graduate to the level of theory. Take, for example, atomic theory or the germ theory of disease. There is no doubt that both of these are certainly factual. Same with evolution. Maybe you could think of a theory as what happens when a hypothesis is effectively proven, because now modern science requires that level of confidence in order to graduate to the level of theory. There is no level higher than that. Theories include and envelop natural laws, testable hypotheses, and of course objectively verifiable facts, and are the body of knowledge explaining all these things within their particular field of study.
And can we also consider teaching other theories of the origin of species?
There aren't any. Evolution is the only theory of biodiversity there is or ever was.
It's like the theory that was believed in by every signer of the Declaration of Independence. Every signer of the Declaration of Independence believed that men and women were created and were endowed by that same creator with certain unalienable rights.
Before the days of scientific understanding, people believed in mysticism, even some of the smart ones. Many of the signers of the Declaration of Independence believed in phlogiston and vitalism, both of which were disproved in the 19th century. Do you want to drag science education back to the 1700s?
What are you talking about, Aaron? Of course he does. In fact, he'd much rather that there was no science education at all. If there was no scientific education at all, and people didn't learn about things like skepticism and doing experiments, everybody might believe his religious bullshit.
The Bible tells us that God created man in his own image, male and female, he created them. And I believe that.
Then you're a fool, one who too readily believes improbable claims from questionable sources on insufficient evidence, or one who believes completely something written or said by another without question, without reservation, or without reason. The Bible is a man-made compilation of mythology, of adapted fables from previous polytheism, and every testable claim the Bible made has been disproved.
So, what is the thrust of this video? What is this all about? Well, it's to do with science denial to do with climate change, to do with how we should deal with the coronavirus. Bear in mind that I'm shooting this at the beginning of March in 2020, if you're watching this in the future. How we should deal with all sorts of issues. Now, I couldn't find the actual tweet, but this one here from Saki sort of summarises a tweet that came earlier from a theist. Everything is in the hands of God. Let's not worry about anything. God will decide what's going to happen. God's in control. God's in control of everything. Well, it's funny that the theist should say this, because here's some things that I never see. Okay, so here I am in my car. Now, if I was a Christian driver and God was really in control, then why wouldn't I do this when I'm driving along? I mean, I even see the people with little fish on the back of their car. I don't see any of them driving around with blindfolds on and their hands in the air. Why not if God's in control? And exactly the same sort of thing with crossing the road. Why not just put your blindfold on and run across the road? If God's in control, he'll look after you. And while we're on about this, why does America, with God protecting them, spend so much money on defense? Isn't God in control? Shouldn't God be looking after everything? Shouldn't God decide when things are going to happen? You know, if God was in control, how did the Twin Towers happen? The simple fact of the matter is that when people say these sorts of things, it's just a platitude. They don't really believe it, because if they did, they would just go through life letting God take care of everything. And guess what? They'd starve to death in no time at all. So why is it that they trot out these platitudes when it comes to things like climate change and the coronavirus? It's clear to me that they don't really believe these things at all. Or do they? I'm sure some of them do, which will bring me back to Pence shortly. But here's a question, and I'm sorry if I posed this in another video, but Pence's wife works at one of these Christian schools, you know, the ones where they persecute LGBTQI students and that sort of thing, and they wouldn't have anybody gay teaching there. One of those sorts of schools. And I wonder how much they truly believe what they preach themselves. I mean, if Mrs. Pence needs a day off, can she get on the bell and say to them, "Oh, I've got a bit of a demonic possession today, but I think it's only a 24-hour demonic possession, and I'll be in tomorrow"? How do you think she'd get away with that? When I see tweets like this one, I just despair of people. Did you see my last video about Pascal's wager type arguments? Should we really just sit back and do nothing? What if there isn't a God? Just admit the possibility for a moment that your God doesn't exist, or even that he does exist, but he actually doesn't care that much about us. He doesn't want to do anything for us. We are the only ones that can do something about things in those situations. So why are we not acting on climate? Why do we not have appropriate responses to all sorts of things that are going on in the world? Plastics and so on. We have to act. It was people that developed antibiotics. Think about all the great progress that's been made over the last few hundred years in all sorts of things. Science and in philosophy, in our moral progress. All of these things have been done by people, not by a God. So, returning to Pence, when I see a tweet like this about how we have the steady hand of the VP, we know how steady Pence is. The opening video showed what he said in 2002. And despite the fact that in the 18 years in between that and this, there's been more and more evidence for evolution, and intelligent design was squashed at the Dover trial, but Pence will have learned none of that in these 18 years. Yet he's steady. He's steadfast. He's steadfast in his delusional beliefs. And we don't need somebody like that in charge of a response to a major crisis where he thinks that God has got everybody's back. So, here's a tweet from one of my favourite tweeters, Lady Asneth, and she hits the nail on the head. We don't need a science denier in charge of anything. And finally, if you don't believe me, here's the VP himself. The best defense against coronavirus is to carry a pocket Bible. Really? How many of you watching this, even Christians, honestly believe that that's the case? Who would rather carry a pocket Bible than, for example, wash their hands?